Hey everyone! One of the most requested videos that we've ever gotten was for our ebook design and how we designed our ebook, how we built it, how we continue to add stuff to it. So this tutorial video is going to walk through how we ended up creating it, specifically going through a step-by-step guide on how we designed and built these pages here, which make up the majority of our site. So I'm going to go through step by step on how we built these, as well as go through our content structure and how we can continue to grow this site with our CMS. I'm going to start this video with a brief introduction on what we see here, which is just the first page. Now, I won't go into detail on how this was built. It's actually a very simple section that just has two thumbnail images, a header, and a footer, and this is just a dynamic list that will constantly grow as we add new ebooks. But what I do want to step a little bit into is how we have our content structured. Now, you might think going through here that this is actually a pretty big site, and it is. However, if we go to our pages, we only have one page, which is this home page here. The rest of this site is built up of collection template pages, including the authors template, chapters template, and the ebooks template. Now, if we step into our collection items themselves, we'll see that we already have a handful of items here, which is great because this is what I'm going to use to design the pages going forward. Now, we have our authors, pretty straightforward. We just have our authors that we link directly to each chapter. Inside of these authors collections, we have the name, the author image, and some profile information here, just a little bio. The chapters, in fact, let's go with the ebooks first. The ebooks almost work as categories in that the chapters are all assigned to an ebook, and then these ebooks have fields like name, subtitle, the lead statement, which we're going to get to in a moment, or in fact, I can just quickly jump over and show you right now. That's this statement right here. So it looks slightly different than the rest of the content. And then we have our introduction text. So the ebooks don't have chapters or articles necessarily. They just have introduction text, which introduces the chapters that come after it. So just like a blog post, this would just be a rich text field here. And then down below, we have our banner image and thumbnail image. The difference is the banner image is what we see here, the larger image, where the thumbnail image is what would be displayed, here. So it's smaller, doesn't take up as much weight, and doesn't slow the site down. Down here, it gets a little bit more complex, and one of the things that we need to do for all of these is add a first chapter link or a previous chapter link. So in this case, for the ebook, because this is the first chapter, the first introduction before going into the ebook, we just need to add a first chapter and a first chapter name. So the link and the name. The link is a direct link that goes to the first chapter of this ebook, which we have over here. And then the first chapter name is the name of the first chapter that we're going to. So those are the ebooks. The ebook page and the chapters pages are actually very similar. So notice here, we have our ebook page. This is the ebooks.webflow.com/ebook/webdesign101. So this is the home page for the Web Design 101 ebook. So this is that introduction text that I spoke about. We have our banner image, the title, and our subtitle below. And then down here, we have our first chapter, including that first chapter title. And then when we click, it's going to go to that link. Now this page is actually a separate template page. It looks very similar, but it's a different page altogether to the previous ebook page that we were on. So I'm not going to spend time on designing both of them, because if you can design this one, you would just be able to copy and paste or reuse this design for that main ebook page. So in this case, we're going to be designing and redesigning this using the content that we already have, including this bottom link for next chapter, and if we go deeper, a previous chapter. We're also going to rebuild this view chapters link right here, which shows all the chapters in this ebook. Now, before we jump into the design, let's go into what makes up the content of each of our chapters. So if I click into here, we're going to see somewhat the same styles or same content as we had on the eBooks page, so including the name, some intro text, which is almost like a subtitle, the lead sentence, which is going to be the first thing before the main content, and then again we have a thumbnail and a banner. The thumbnail image is what is displayed on the side here, so notice it's again a little bit smaller, and the banner image is the large image that is displayed here. Now, we could use the same one. We chose to, in most cases, to use 2 because the thumbnail image is going to be smaller. Down here, we have the previous chapter title, the next chapter, and the next chapter title. Because there currently isn't a way to do a previous and next dynamically, we had to manually insert links that go to the previous and next chapter. So each of these items manually will link directly to the next chapter in the book. Now the chapters are associated to this chapter number. So in this case, each chapter has a number so that we can sort them from 1 to wherever the chapters end or wherever the ebook ends. Down here we reference the ebook because when we display them together, we want to be able to reference or sort them based on the ebook that they are in. And then of course, each chapter has the author and then the full article. So this is the main content that will make up that chapter. Perfect. So that's the structure of our ebook. Let's go ahead and jump into the design on how we created it in the first place. So let's navigate over to our chapters template, which right now is completely empty. It's just a blank canvas. We can go over here and notice that we just have our body. Now let's jump through. We're going to jump kind of back and forth as we go to see what we're working with and what we're trying to create. The first thing we want to do is create the overall structure of holding these 2 side elements, which in this case, the right is fully fixed and we can scroll. The left has content that is vertically centered in the middle and also has this View Chapters button, which opens up and shows all the chapters for this ebook. So let's start first with creating these 2 different sections, and then let's move into the left side first and create what we see right here. So going in, the first thing I want to do is drag in a div block, which is going to work as our page wrapper. And then this page wrapper is going to be absolutely positioned, and I want it to cover the entire screen. So in this case, the height of 100 VH. And just so we can see if this is working, let's go ahead and change the background to blue just to make sure, and we can see right now that it is. So right now, the page wrapper is covering the entire screen and always will. Now inside of this page wrapper, I want to have my 2 different items. So I'm going to use a little something called Flexbox to do this easily. So I'm going to do change to display flex, and then I need to add 2 div blocks. So I'll simply drag in 2. This is going to be the left side. This one is going to be the right side. The left side is going to have a width of 45%. So not quite halfway, but almost. Where the right-hand side is simply going to fill the remaining space. So left-hand side is at 40%, right side is going to fill whatever that remaining space is, which in this case is 55%. Now the left-hand side is going to have the background image. So we're going to go ahead and get the background image from our banner. And then if we scroll down, we need to adjust the image so that it's covered and centered. There we go. It's already coming around already. Now, one thing I want to do is make sure that there's always a little bit of padding on all sides. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 3%. And then holding Shift on my keyboard, I can change it so that the other sides are all going to be equal. So now we have a 3% padding, notice on that left-hand side of the green on all sides. And that's just going to keep my content from getting too close to the edges. And then in here, I want to add my content wrapper. So this is going to work as the content wrapper on this section, on the left-hand section there. The max width that I want this section is to be 560 pixels. Now the reason is, and I'm also going to center this, the reason is on wide screens or wide monitors, I don't want it to get so wide that the content is just hard to read or provides a bad user experience. Users don't like to read too far across a screen, and 560 pixels in this case is a good width to keep that content centered here. In fact, a good example of this, if I scroll over here and zoom out, notice that regardless of how wide the screen gets, this content will always stay justified in the middle, as will this content here. So that's what we're going for. That's the reason why we have that max width. Now, one thing that we also did was vertically center this content wrapper. So to do that, I'm going to click back on my left side, and we're going to use Flexbox one more time. So display setting, change to flex. And then for the flex layout, we want to change to align center. So notice the content wrapper is now in the center. And we can start to add items like our heading, which is going to work as our chapter name. And we can adjust the styles accordingly. And then we have a subtitle, which I can drag in as a text block right below the heading. We're going to get text from the intro text, or sorry, not the intro text. Yeah, intro text. And here, I'm going to call this our subtitle. Change the color to white and increase the size a little bit here. Beautiful. Now, one thing that I want to do is center this content here, but I'm going to be reusing this content wrapper throughout. So I'm going to go ahead and add an additional class or a combo class to center this content. And all we need to do is simply adjust the text align to center. And this is all coming along, and actually I forgot to bind this. We binded this. I need to bind this chapter name. So I'm going to click on the chapter name, go to settings. I'm going to get my text from, and then I'm going to choose name. So in this case, it's going to pull the name of this particular chapter that we see right here. And if we were to skip to a different chapter, we'll notice that so far, all the content is being binded accurately and accordingly, just as we wanted. And actually, this is a great position to stop and take a look here. This image is a little bit light, but the text on it is very white as well, so it causes a little bit of pain to read. It's hard to read. We need to adjust that. Now, one thing I like to do is simply use an overlay. So I do that. I'm going to drag in a div block. I'm going to change this class or add a class to be called overlay. This overlay is going to be absolutely positioned to cover that entire screen. And then down here for the background, I can simply add an overlay. Now I know that right now this looks a little bit strange. It's covering the entire screen where really we just want it to cover the left screen. If we go to the navigator panel, we notice that right now it is in the left side. However, there is no absolute or relative positioning that it's set here. So we need to change the position from auto to relative, which is going to have the overlay cover relative to that left side. So it's going to stay within that left side wrapper. Now, another thing that we'll notice is that the overlay is sitting on top of the text. So what I want to do is make sure that the content and the content wrapper is always sitting a little bit higher. So I'm going to change the position to relative and adjust the z-index to be higher than 0, which is what the overlay is set at. And now, anything that's inside of this content wrapper will sit on top of the overlay. And in this case, the overlay is providing a little bit of darkness to go over the background image there. Now, below these two pieces of content, we also have our author information. So I'm going to add a new div block below. I'm going to drag in an image, which is going to work as our author image. And let's change this height and width to be 40 pixels on both sides. Let's adjust the border radius so that it's really high and creates a circle. And then I'm going to get my image from the author, which was binded to this chapter. There we are. And we can add some margin on the top. And then below this image, we want the author name. So again, we can add the text block, add a class, and make any styles that we like, and then bind it to, in this case, we want the author name. So going down to the bottom, we'll see author and name. And that is in fact Neil, so we know that's working. There we are. So now we have the main content on the left-hand side. Remember, we still have two more pieces. One, we have our logo that was centered at the top, and then we also have that button to view all chapters on the bottom left. So let's add our logo first. The first thing I want to do though is add in a link block, because when the user clicks on the link block, I want it to go to the home page. So in this case, I can change the link settings to go to home. And then I want to add an image inside of the link block here. There we go. And whoops, we want to add it into our contents. Well, it actually won't matter, and we'll see in just a moment. So this link block, I'm going to change to our logo. And then I want to absolutely position it on the very top. I also want to center any of the content, so that includes that logo. And then for the z-index, I'm going to make it so that it is also 10. So it's going to sit above that content wrapper, or sorry, that overlay, and that we can see it. And then for the image, we can swap it out with our logo and adjust the size right there. Perfect. Now let's add a little bit of space. I'm going to go back to our logo and just add a little bit of margin on the top. Perfect. Great, so now the last piece we have on here is going to be the chapters. So it starts with the button, and then this button, we can call this our chapters link, and I'm going to position it absolutely again on the bottom left. And then I'm going to add some padding. Let's do the 3% on the left-hand side and 5% from the bottom. And we can adjust these in any way that we like. Maybe we want to do 4 and 4. Perfect. Now we also want this button to have a white background here. I'm going to change the text. And then one thing I like to do with buttons is I'm going to add a little padding on the left, and then I'm going to add a background icon. So I'm going to use an icon that we have here for our list. I'm going to position it all the way to the left and centered. I'm going to choose not to tile it. And then let's change the size. Let's try 15 pixels. That looks great. And let's adjust it so that it's not quite to the side there. There we are. And we can change the button text to say, view all chapters. Perfect. Now what we need to do is actually add that chapter slider or drawer that appears when we click on this view all chapters button. Let's take one more look at this. We click and it appears on the left. So it's a multi-step process. The first thing we need to do is actually add in that item altogether. So let's drag in a div block. Oops, I want to drag it so that it's in this page wrapper. And let's give it a class. Let's call this our chapter wrapper. And I want it to have a width of 45%. And then I also want it to be fixed on the left-hand side of the screen. And then let's raise it up. We want this to be the highest object on this page so that it always appears on top. And then let's adjust the background color to be white. Perfect. So now notice that the chapter wrapper is sitting on top of that side content, which is exactly what we wanted. Let's go ahead and add some padding on the inside. So let's do the 3% again. Oops, hold shift. There we are. Great. Now we're going to add our content wrapper. So I'm going to add in a div block, give it that same content wrapper class. And again, this is because we really wanted to have a max width of 560 pixels. Inside here, we can go ahead and start adding in our content, which I believe included in H4 that said chapters. And then below this heading was a dynamic list that showed all of our chapters in this ebook. So I'm going to drag in a dynamic list, select chapters, and notice now we're going to see all these chapters below. One thing that you're going to notice really quick when you're building it, certainly if your user was on it, is that we can see content is bleeding off or overflowing off of this side wrapper. However, I can't scroll to go and get it. What we need to do is go back to our chapters wrapper here, scroll down, and in overflow, change it from visible to scroll. That means if there is any overflow, like there is over here, if we scroll, we'll be able to see all of the content. So this is a great little trick to use on side menus or layouts of this nature. We also notice that there's quite a bit of chapters that are being displayed here, and they are not filtered based on the ebook. So what we want to do is scroll down, change it so that there is a filter that is binded to the ebook that we referenced, and we want to choose to only show chapters that are equal to the ebook of the current chapter. There we are. So now we're only showing chapters for this particular ebook. So let's go ahead and start adding in the content here before we mess with any sorting order or anything like that. Let's first drag in a div block, and let's give it a thumbnail. So let's call it chapter thumbnail. And we can start to style this. Let's do 25%, maybe adjust the heights, try 100. There we go, how about 90? Add some margin on the right-hand side, and let's float it to the left. And then here we want to use a background image that is equal to our thumbnail. So we need to adjust it. So here we can choose to get our background image from the thumbnail. And then we can go and adjust the way this background image is displayed down here in background image. And then choose to cover and center. And we're noticing we see all of our background images there, all of our thumbnail images. Now what I want to do is actually I'm going to give a class to the dynamic item, which in this case is the wrapper for each of these individual chapters here. So let's call this our chapter item. And I'm just going to add a little bit of margin on the bottom. And notice when we add margin to one, it's going to add margin to all of them, which is great. And then I also want to add both the chapter number and the chapter name. So let's go ahead and drag in a new div block right into the chapter item. And then in here, I want to add a text block, which is going to work as my chapter number. And I want to change it from display block, which is what we see right here, to display inline block. And the reason is because I'm going to type in chapter. I'm going to replicate this, so using Command C and Command V on my keyboard. Let's add a little bit of margin on the right-hand side of it. And then I want to pull this object here. I want to get the information or get text from chapters and bind it to our chapter number. And we'll notice right now that these chapters are displayed in the reverse order of what we want. So let's go ahead now that we can see them, go to sort order, which is in our settings, and change it so that it's sorted by chapter number, smallest to largest. And there we go. So now we have chapters 1 through 12, which is great. And we can adjust the styles of these accordingly, however we'd like. Great. And now we can add some text below for the name. So I'm going to add a text block. I'm going to bind this to the name of the chapter itself. And then let's adjust these styles here. And we can adjust the styles the way we like. There we are. Now, one thing that we didn't do is actually add a link. So right now, if I was to preview this, there's no way for me to click on these objects and for me to be taken to that chapter. Now, I should have probably done this at the beginning, but we're going to add it in now. I'm going to take a link block. I'm going to drag it into that chapter item. And then I'm going to move everything into that link block. And we can give this link block a class. Let's call this our chapter link. Oops, we already took that. Let's do chapter link item. And we're going to change the display setting to display block. So notice now all these items are going to be clickable. And I'm actually even just going to keep that same style that we see there, which was inherited by links in general. And there we go. So now, and in fact, actually not now, if we're to click, nothing happens. We need to go back to that link block, go to our settings, and then in the link settings, change it to the detail page of ebook. So it's going to reference, or sorry, chapter. We want it to go to the current chapter that we're referencing. So it's going to go to the individual chapter that we see here. And notice that we have the scroll working properly. All the chapters are in order. So now we just need to add our close link and we're good to go. So I'm going to drag in a text link. This is our close. We can type in close here. And then I'm going to position this so that it is, actually I'm going to keep it, let's keep it like that so that now the close link just sits right above. I'm going to eliminate a little bit of the padding on the top though. Maybe add a little bit of padding, or sorry, some margin below. There we are. So now what happens is when this link is clicked, this will close back up. But before we can do that, we need to create the initial appearance, or how we want this object to appear when the page loads. So I'm going to click on my chapter wrapper, and then I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and I want to change it or transform it so that it is moved to the left-hand side 100%, which means it's going to be moved 100% off. I also want to change it to display none, because when it's off the screen, I don't want it to be displayed on this website or page at all. Great, so now we can see everything that we're working with here. What we need to do is add an interaction on this button that causes that slider or that drawer to slide out when clicked. So let's go ahead and go to our objects. Let's call this our chapter slide. And the trigger is going to be a click. So when we click on this button, we want to affect a different element. So this is our chapter wrapper. And then on first click, when we click this button, we want it to transform. Or actually, we do want it to transform, but first we need it to go back to display block. So we do want it to move to its origin. So I'm going to keep that there. Click done. Add a new one that makes it so that it is display block. And now the ordering is important here. I want to make sure that the display block happens first, and then it moves back to its point of origin. Great. Now let's go ahead and preview this and see if it works. So I click on view all chapters and it pops out, which is great. But now when I click on close, nothing happens. Well, now we need to add a similar interaction onto the close link. Let's go ahead and find that close link. There it is right there. Let's add a new interaction. Let's call this close chapter slide. So we can be very specific, know exactly what it's talking about. Trigger is again a click. We want to affect a different element again. This is again our chapter wrapper. And then on first click, we want it to transform. We want it to move again 100% to the left. And then we want it to display none. So it's reverse order of what we just did. Now we can check and see if this is working properly. So we'll click the button. It displays the chapters. We click close and it closes away. And we can do this as many times as we like. And that is perfect. And we're going to get the same interaction or the same effect on any page that we see here, which is exactly what we want. Although that one didn't have the slide. There we go. Perfect. So now we have the left-hand side. Let's go ahead and work on the right-hand side. So let's jump back over here. Left-hand side is done. The right-hand side, we have some items up here at the top. we have our lead statement there, our lead sentence, and then our main content followed by this previous and next chapter at the bottom. So let's go ahead and design the right-hand side. So again, first, I want to add in that content wrapper, which is what we used in the previous sides as well. So drag it into the right-hand side div block, and we're going to call this our content wrapper. And let's add some padding on the right-hand side. Let's again do the 3% on all sides. There we are. Perfect. Now for this content, we have multiple layers. We're going to have that top bar, which had those links on it, and then we're going to have our content below it. So I'm going to first add in a div block. Let's call this our top content. And I'm going to add some margin on the bottom. Now inside of this top content, if we go back, we have the name of the ebook with a link back to that ebook page, the chapter number, and then a simple try Webflow link on the right-hand side. So let's go ahead and replicate this. We have a link, which let's call this our top link. Let's add some space on the right-hand side of it. And now let's get our content from the bindings or the CMS here. We want to go to the ebook page, the ebook that is being referenced, and also get the text from the ebook as well. There we are. So Web Design 101 is the name of the ebook. Let's go ahead and adjust the way these links are displayed. There we are. That looks good. And then we had a couple of these. We had the top link, and then we also had the try Webflow link. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add an additional class, a combo class called try Webflow. And then I'm just going to float this to the right. And if we wanted, we could adjust the color so that it's a little bit more unique and stands out a little bit. There we are. So next to this content, or next to the top link for the ebook, we also had the text for it, the chapter number. So let's go ahead and add in a new text block right next to it. Let's call this, in fact, I'm going to give it the same top link class. And notice that because it's not a link, it's not going to have any of the hover treatments, which is great. And there we go. This is the chapter. And I'm just going to add another one, copy and paste. This is the number. So I'm going to get text from chapter number. And in this case, let's go ahead and add an additional class here. This one needs a little bit more space. This one needs a little bit less between the 5 and the chapter. So let's call this our top link chapter. And we can decrease that there. There we are. And this one looks like it's a little bit out of sorts. Let's go ahead and sort so that these are all floating to the left. There we go. So now these are floating to the left. Web Design 101 is floating to the right. This is actually try Webflow. There we are. So there is our top section. In try Webflow, we can just add a direct link to webflow.com and open in a new tab. Perfect. So there is our top content. Let's go ahead and add a new div block below, which is going to hold our regular content. Whoops, we want it to be outside of top content, the content wrapper. There we are. So in here, we have first our lead statement. So let's go ahead and type that in, give it a class so that we can style it a little bit differently. It's a little bit bigger of the text. We could make it maybe a little bit bolder. And now let's bind it to the lead text here. And now that we see the content, that's the beauty of designing content first, is that you can actually customize and design it with the real content in place. Perfect. And again, we could style this and customize it in any way that we'd like. I'm going to keep it like that for now. There's our lead statement. Below it, we're going to add in our rich text. And this rich text is going to be bound to the full article. And again, we're noticing that on the right-hand side, it's pushing everything down. Well, there's two things we need to do. One, we need to make the right-hand side fixed. So I'm going to go down here, change it to fixed. And then I also want to change it, just like we did with that side menu, to scroll. So now when we preview this, whoops, and one more thing, height needs to go to 100 VH. There we go. So now it's going to be 100 VH on the right-hand side, and we have all of our content there. Now, one thing we can notice right away is that this content was not positioned inside of that wrapper. So let's go ahead and add this rich text right back into our content wrapper. There we go. Perfect. Now the next piece that we need to add is going to be the content on the bottom right. So that is that previous and next chapters. So let's go ahead, I'm going to drag in, whoops, I need to drag in another div block. And this one can sit on the right-hand side. And then I want to position it, or I want to fix it. But let's go ahead and have this as our chapter nav. And then I want to position it so that it is fixed on the bottom right and has a width of 55%, which is the same width that we have on this right side here. Now I can add some padding on the top and the bottom. I can add a background color of white. I'm even going to add a little border on the top so that we can differentiate it a little bit better. There we are. Now inside of this chapter nav, I'm going to add some columns, 3 columns. And then inside of these columns, I want to add in an additional div block, or at least on the left and the right column. This div block is going to display the previous and next chapter. So again, I'm going to drag in a previous text, or it's going to work as our previous text. Let's call this our previous chapter. Let's call this prev next. And this is going to be all caps, a little bit smaller, and a little bit bolder. There we are. Let's add a little bit of margin on the bottom. And then below this, we have the chapter name. So let's call this our chapter name link. And then down here again, we can adjust the styles and bind it so that it's showing the correct name. There we are. Or actually, this is a link. Let's go ahead and drag in a text link instead. That was my fault. We're going to do the same thing. So this was chapter name link. Set to display block. I'm going to delete that other one there. Now, instead of binding it dynamically, we actually need to get the URL from the previous and next chapter links. So the previous chapter, which is in this case that one, and then we're going to get the text from previous chapter as well. Oops, sorry, we need the previous chapter title. There we are. Perfect. So now it's displaying the previous chapter information. Let's go ahead and take this entire div block. I'm going to Command C, Command V over in this third column over here. And in this case, I'm going to give a class to the div block that is wrapping them. Let's call this our next chapter. And just because I want to text align it to the right. Now I need to change the bindings here and change the text here. So this is the next chapter. Down here, we want to change it from get URL to next chapter and get text from next chapter as well. Perfect. Now here, just because I want to change, this is more of an option. I just want to change it so this height isn't interfering as we're looking at this. On the published site, it would not happen, but here it's going to show is inflated. So I just want to design without that there. So in this case, we can preview and see what it's going to look like. Now I also want to change it so that there's some padding on the sides. And let's also, because this middle column isn't really taking up anything, let's just add so that it's 5 on each side. Perfect. And again, you can go in and customize it to be any way that you would like. In this case, I'm just going to make the titles a little bit bigger. Perfect. And there we go. That looks great. So that was the basic section of what we have going on here. There's a couple more steps that we're going to follow, but let's go ahead and double check and make sure that all these are working. Web design is going to go back to the web design page, which again, we haven't designed yet. What we're going to do there is simply replicate what we built in chapters and then make any changes that we need to, like removing the author and then removing the top link up here, the chapter number because it doesn't have a chapter. But really it's going to follow the same design. One piece that is not going to, in fact, we're looking at it right now, if there's no chapter or no next chapter, the information is going to be blank. Well, we don't want to show next chapter at all if there's no chapter. So what we want to do is on the blocks that are holding these div blocks in the columns, we're going to go to our settings. Down here in conditional visibility, we're going to say that if there is no next chapter in this case, if there's no next chapter title, so in this case, it's only visible when it is set. In this case, it is not. So it's going to disappear. We're going to do the same to the left-hand side, except instead of the next chapter, we want to do previous chapter. So element is visible when the previous chapter is set. So in this case, it's going to stay because there is indeed a previous chapter. If we go to a different chapter, we'll see in this case, there is a previous and a next chapter, and they're both going to be displayed there. And there you have it. So that is the basic construction of what we did with our ebook. And we're really excited to continue to launch these ebooks and continue to produce this content going forward. I'm going to spend a little bit of time briefly now showing how we made it mobilely responsive. So here we have our desktop view. I'm going to spend a little bit of time making sure that we can get this to look great on all devices. Now I'm going to start by going down to tablet mode. Now this is where you can really try to choose however you really want things to be displayed. Whoops, go back to my chapters. In this case, we may want to, on tablet, keep it so that it's displayed on the left. Let's go double check and see how that is. So it looks like it is. It is displayed even on tablet. So let's just make some style changes so that the text doesn't look so crammed. So in this case, up at the top, let's change the size of these top links so that they're not that big. They don't cram onto each other. There we are. And then we can adjust the text to be any size that we'd like as well. Down here, same thing. Really what a lot of mobile design is going to be in Webflow is a lot of back and forth, tweaking, making sure that everything looks good on a smaller screen. There we are. And last little touch here. Perfect. Now let's check and make sure that the View Chapters button is working. Let's go ahead and see what happens when we click here. And it looks like that is still working. Again, we can make some changes. Now, because this is hidden, we need to go back into our chapter wrapper and change it so that it's at display block again and moved back over. Now we can see it on the screen and make changes. There we are. And that looks good. And I'm going to actually just keep this open for right now because I don't want to go back and forth on each of these devices. So for right now, let's keep this open and see how this looks on all of our different devices. On this screen, let's go a little bit bigger. In fact, maybe we go all the way. On this screen size, we want to take up the full width, which looks good. We can adjust the size of the text here. There we are. And then on mobile, it should look good as well. Again, we'll adjust the size. Now, what we need to remember in this case is going back to our chapter wrapper on tablet and then reverse it back to its hidden away setting. So in this case, display none, and let's turn back on this move left. And that will carry forward down to these other devices as well. So there we have it on tablet. Let's go ahead and go to our landscape mode. In this case, I want to change it so that it's full width. So let's go ahead and choose, whoops, go to this screen. Actually, sorry, skipping all over the place. Left side. Let's change the width to 100%. Height, let's go ahead and keep this at, let's try 300 pixels. There we go. Now the right-hand side is still fixed on the right. Let's go ahead and change that. The height in this case is set to auto. The width is going to be set to 100%. And then let's change it so that its position is also auto. There we are. Now we can add some additional padding on the sides if we like. And on the top and the bottom. View chapters, in some cases we could move it, we could change it. I actually kind of like it the way it is right there, so I'm going to keep it. Let's add a little bit more. In fact, let's change this to auto with just some padding on the top and the bottom. There we go. And then view chapters, let's go ahead and just keep that right there. I like the way that looks. Now that we're on a device with more space, we can adjust the sizing here as well. And then just do a double check to make sure everything looks good here, and it does. One piece that does look off is this chapter nav below. Let's go ahead and change it so that instead of being on the bottom right, it's bottom covered, or just on the bottom, and then 100% wide. Now here, what it's going to try to do, let's go to a chapter that has a before and after, is it's going to stack them. And that's simply because we have these in columns, and portrait mode is going to stack them, which I actually think is perfect. We don't want them to have to be crammed side by side. So let's go ahead and instead, on the chapter nav, center all of the text. And then down here, we need to go back to that next chapter and manually do it here because we had manually sorted it or aligned it to the right before. Perfect. So now we have our previous and next chapters set up. Everything is looking good on this device. Let's go to our final mobile portrait. Now we have a few more tweaks to make here. Obviously, we want a little bit more space on the top and the bottom. So let's go ahead and adjust that. I actually want a little more space on the left and the right. So let's go ahead and change it to 5. Chapter name, let's decrease the size of that. And then decrease the size of the subtitle just a little bit. There we are. View chapters, instead of being on that positioned absolutely on the bottom, let's go ahead and move it to auto. Actually, we'll keep it there and just have it fill up to full width on the bottom. And that looks good. So now view all chapters will open up just as we had before. There we are. Now up here, we notice that we're starting to get a little crammed. What I like to do whenever things start to get crammed that way is simply have them stacked one on top of the other. So in this case, instead of having it for inline block, let's have it go the full width, fixed none, and let's start to push things down a bit. Top link chapter, however, we still want side by side. Let's change this back to chapter. There we are. And then the try Webflow link, let's go ahead and align it to the left as well. And then in fact, let's just center those. So now we still have the ebook chapter and the try Webflow link there. Now down here at the bottom, we still have our previous and next chapter links set up. We can adjust these to be a slightly different size if we'd like. And then maybe adjust it so there's not quite as much padding. Because what we have to remember in this view is that a mobile device doesn't have as much real estate as a desktop device. But there we go. And everything looks good. So that was our mobile checkup. Everything on desktop should be as it was before. Looks like up here something broke. And again, that is going to happen consistently when you are working on things like this. Let's go ahead and change it. There we are. And now we can check and make sure all of our different chapters are displaying properly. In some cases, you may notice that some look better than others. That's a great opportunity to go in and make changes. Say, for example, you don't think that floating to 3 lines is very helpful. We can go ahead and maybe adjust the size so that in those cases, or in some cases, it won't wrap to 3 lines, which will save us some real estate. So maybe this is a longer one. Let's see. And that looks pretty good. So it's going to adjust it for all of them. But in this case, hopefully, even for long names, it only wraps to 2 lines. And we can double check and make sure that's working. And great. So that is how we built and designed our ebook site. We hope you enjoyed this video and watching us build our ebook site. We're really proud of it. We love adding new content to it, and we hope that it was valuable to watch us build it.